I'm so bored. Thanks to the organizer for including our paper in the program. It's truly a pleasure to be in beautiful San Diego and speaking with you the work we have been doing on platform governance and regulation. I'm Helen Zeng from UC Davis, and this is joint work with George and Michael Smith from Carnegie Mellon and Brett Danaher at Chapman University, who is sitting with it. So in this paper, we look at a specific regulation tool, platform liability, which has been at the center of policy debate in recent years. I want to start with the background, which I believe will be incredibly familiar to all of you. So over the past 2 decades, the digital platforms have been fundamentally reshaping the economic activity, and the positive side have been well documented in the literature, including reducing coordination costs, improving market matching, expanding access to income-generating opportunities. But today, I will focus on the other side of the transformation, which is when digital platforms generate negative externalities, including facilitating illicit trade, spreading harmful content, and even enabling activities such as terrorist recruitment. So let's raise up a central question. How should we regulate online harms? Or more specifically, how should liability be allocated in the two-side market? At the heart of this debate is whether the digital platforms should be viewed as the publishers with editorial right and liability, or as nature infrastructure provider that are not accountable for any third-party user-generated content, even when the content is harmful. And this question has been actively debated across jurisdictions from DC, London to Brussels. And we see that recent legislation, such as UK's Online Safety Bill or EU's Digital Services Act, have moved towards the direction of imposing greater platform accountability, which has sparked extensive global debate. But ultimately, whether platform liability is an effective tool in reducing online harms remains to be an open empirical question. So in this study, we leverage a nature experiment to try to answer this question. And the nature experiment we use here is in March 2018, the US passed a legislation called FOSTA-SISTA, which narrowed the Section 230 Communication Decency Act by removing safe harbor protection for digital platforms that knowingly facilitate sex trafficking. To understand this shift, it would be helpful to understand the environment prior to the intervention. So in the pre-word, the digital platforms were shielded from any kind of liability for third-party user-generated content. This really enabled the growth of user-generated ecosystem, but on the other hand, it also allowed the harmful activities to migrate online. A stark example is the sex trafficking activities facilitated by digital platforms. This has been widely documented in investigative reporting, including by the New York Times. So here I just show some articles of it a few years ago. Let me start with the definition. Any kind of commercial sex act involving a minor person under the age of 18 is classified as sex trafficking. Well, unfortunately, over time, internet has become the primary channel for facilitating this kind of activities. I would like to first show you some data here. So the stats from National Center for Missing and Exploited Children show a more than 800% increase in suspected child trafficking cases between 2010 to 2015, a rise widely attributed to the growing use of online platforms. If you need more data, here's a report of 2015 US Senate investigation. And this investigation found that a website called Backpage was involved in around 3/4 of those reports submitted to NICVIC by the general public. This investigation also concluded that this website has actively concealed evidence for such activity. For example, by removing terms indicative of minors, such as Lolita, little girl, teen, fresh, prior to posting advertisement. So much so, given the scale of the harms, in March 2018, the US Congress passed a anti-trafficking legislation called FOSTA-SISTA, Fight Online Sex Trafficking and Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. This law fundamentally shifted the platform governance by imposing legal liability to digital intermediaries that knowingly assist facilitate or support sex trafficking activities. So the passage of the bill has been really controversial. From the econ perspective, liability regulation is a tool for aligning platform incentives with this public social welfare. But whether this can actually reduce harm remains to be an open question. The commentators have argued that such law may simply push the illegal activity offshore or underground instead of reducing them. Critics have even included Senator Elizabeth Warren, who later called for a closer evaluation of this policy's effectiveness, despite initially supporting the passage of the bill. So this brings us to the first order question for platform governance. Does platform liability actually change the equilibrium behavior? And so this is the question we aim to address in this paper. Or more specifically, does imposing platform liability reduce the online trafficking activities of minors? The mechanism we try to test here is pretty straightforward. By imposing platforms to legal risk, this liability regime can raise up the expected cost for facilitating or to hosting this illicit content and increase the penalties for inadequate screening. In response, the digital platforms have stronger incentive to monitor or restrict such content. To verify this, we use Wayback Machine to track how major escort advertising platforms update their landing page, front page, or terms of services around the time of the policy intervention. I'm going to give you some examples here. So a number of websites have made some updates. The first site called AdUpSearch update their front page, adding penalty terms for those posting sexual exploitation materials of minors. US Sex Guide launched a new underage policy. Seeking.com, the third website, did something similar, and Alexa.com at the bottom of their website, and want to stop human trafficking. So all the things highlighted in red were not there prior to intervention, but show up in the website pretty soon after the policy intervention. Importantly, although this law applied broadly to all sex trafficking content, including cases involving art, this updated changes disproportionately focused on the content involving minors. This suggests that the policy raised up the barrier specifically for advertising underage victims. This is sort of important how we use the setup to study the impact on the underage providers. Based on this observed pattern, we hypothesize that this platform liability reduced the effective supply of minors in the online commercial sex market. So what we want to measure here is the supply. What we want to measure here is the supply, but directly measuring the market is extremely challenging because much of this activity happens in a hard-to-observe environment, including encrypted channels or dark web, which make the reliable context data largely unavailable. So instead, we take a market-based approach and use price as an equilibrium outcome to reflect the underlying shift in supply and demand in the market. And this follows a classical framework developed by Lauren Katz and Kevin Murphy, who use the relative wage to study the change in labor market conditions. Our core hypothesis is that if the imposing platform liability make it more difficult to advertise minors on the internet, this will increase the price for underage participants relative to those for adults. So this is sort of the hypothesis we're going to test and study. And after showing you all the empiricals, I'm going to come back to explain to you why this pattern is consistent with a reduction in supply. Okay. Any question? Yeah.
Is it possible that there could be some demand side implications that coincide with this? I don't know the exact environment, but I imagine that maybe this legislation was pushed because we've seen increases in demand or something along those lines. So is it possible that there could be multiple regime changes happening simultaneously?
So this legislation targeting the supply side, we believe it's a supply side intervention. That's why we focus on why this could be a mechanism that drives the change. But at the end, we're going to explain it has to be based on the assumption that passing a legislation imposing platform liability is unlikely to drive up the demand. So when demand is constant or decrease, how we are going to explain the change in price shift.
I guess maybe expanding a little bit, like I agree with you that it's unlikely that the legislation itself maybe directly changes demand, but I wonder, is it possible for there to be common causes, right? Common causes that's both driving legislation as well as is correlated with changes in demand.
So can you elaborate more why we're driving?
I don't know, for better or worse, you know, the Epstein files were released, and then suddenly people are talking a whole lot about pedophilia. And as a result of that, maybe there's more social stigma against pedophiles, God forbid, or not God forbid, but you know, it's crazy that we're having this conversation. But like, let's imagine, right? So suddenly there's like more social costs imposed on these individuals, and then you know they decide to change their ways and there are fewer of them, right? Or I guess conversely, Epstein files released, people talking about pedophilia, and here the God forbid is, or God forbid, like people increase their interest as a result of this. And of course, it corresponds with the legislation.
This is how I think about it. Perhaps after this become a big news, this might bring to people's attention, hey, it might be illegal to go to some of the platforms, look at some of the escort advertising and engage in some of these activities. And to stay away from the advertising that might be having a chance to engage like this. So this might, you know, have a chance to have the consumer substitute for services provided by the participants and more likely to be positioned. That's might be a chance to shift the demand side.
Yeah.
But I just want to bring on home this is a demand supply side intervention.
I guess the reason, I guess connecting to it, right, given that we're going to observe prices and we're going to think about these prices in equilibrium, I just worry that are they being simultaneously determined by portions that we can't observe.
At the end of this after showing the figures, we are going to come back to link this with the shift of supply and demand, and hopefully we can have a discussion that will satisfy you element. So okay, in order to examine the impact of platform liability on the supply of underage providers in the market, we scrapped a large-scale data set from an export review site called Erotic Monkey. This platform serves as a central venue where consumers share detailed reviews of the commercial sex providers in the market. The data from this website allow us to document the general information, including age, ethnicity, and physical features of the providers, the specific services that offer, along with the transaction price charged for those services. Important, to the best of our knowledge, Erotic Monkey is the only website which enables consistent tracking of historical price at the individual provider level, which make it uniquely well suited for testing our hypothesis on how platform liability affect market price. We took the review data for the study window from mid-2017 to end of 2018, that is 8 months in the pre-period and 10 months in the post-period. So you might wonder, what does one of this review data looks like? Here's an actual example with some of the content blurred. So we are going to go through each part of a review in the following slides to sort of give an idea of what kind of information we have. Yes.
So to age, how confident of age information? That seems critical.
Yeah. So we are going to explain in 2 to 3 slides. We're going to assess to general information on providers, including name, contact information, location of transaction. In this case, is New York City. Posting time of the review, which could be viewed as the time of transaction. Information on the provider's appearance, including age, ethnicity, tattoos, whether they smoke, whether they are punctured, etc. And the data here is from people who actually met the transaction. So price here are the transaction price. Okay, coming back to this question. So the key empirical challenge in this study is to distinguish between trafficked and consensual participants. And here we focus on the most observable and legally relevant signal, that is age, because under US law, any commercial sex act involving a minor is classified as sex trafficking. In reviews, the providers are listed in one of the 4 age groups: 18 to 24, 25 to 36, 37 to 45, and 45 above. Therefore, the age classification is based on the reviewer's perception rather than the true age of the providers. Right? So this raises up some challenge in our setup. First is that there is some heterogeneity in reporting. So we see some instance where the same provider is being perceived as 18-24, but at the same time might be perceived as 25 to 36 by another reviewer. To address this, how we tackle this is that we assign each provider into a single age group based on the most frequent reported category across all the reviews they received from the beginning of 2017 to mid of 2019. So spending around 2 years and a half. For instance, if a provider was most often reported as 25 to 36, we classify her in that age group. Another challenging part is everyone is above 18 in this review site, but several news reports indicate that this website was involved in cases involving underage girls. So the tricky part would be to decide to infer who is underage. Well, to deal with this challenge, infer the underage in our data set for the providers in our data set, we take 2 approaches. And the first one, pretty straightforward, simple identification approach. We go ahead with the assumption that the underage participants are most likely to be listed in the youngest available age group, 18 to 24 in the reviews they received. So we have to, based on the assumption that the reported age group closely reflect the true age group for to sort of go ahead with our price analysis. If you agree that this assumption is reasonable, then we sort of treat this 18 to 24 age category as a composite category that might include both young adults and underage participants. In this regard, the providers with a higher share of reviews in the youngest available age category, 18 to 24, will be more likely to be below the legal age of consent. Okay, so this is sort of the benchmark, our starting point. But we do not use this simple approach to identify those who are more likely to be below the legal age of consent. We apply a different framework to compare the price change across different age groups. And the providers in the older age being serve as a control group, and while those in the youngest age category serve as the treatment group. Those who are being listed in the youngest age category, 18-24, most often. And this table shows the estimated coefficient for the relative price change. From column 1 to 4 is that when we lower down the share of how frequent a provider is being listed in the youngest age category. So column 1, all of the time they are listed youngest, 18-24. Column 2, more than 75% of the time in the youngest category. Third column, more than 50% of the time. The fourth column, more than a quarter of the time they are being listed at youngest. And this would identify, in general, 13 to 15 higher increase in market price for the group of youngest providers after the policy reform. Moreover, if you take a closer look at this estimate, the magnitude of the coefficient decline as we lower the share of the reviews in the age group of 18-24. Right? So let's sort of, validate our identification strategy for providers who are more consistently perceived to be younger, or those who are more likely to be underage, disproportionately experience higher price after the policy intervention.
I'm just curious if you were to, do you think it'd be possible to correct the age group by provider in 2026? So for example, those who are still being listed in the same age category, perhaps it was even more likely.
So for this simple approach, we only focus on stability of 2 years and a half. But the second approach I'm going to show you is we actually utilize a expectation maximization algorithm, which allow us to expand the study window to include more reviews to understand the dynamic of changing if they are in younger in early period of time and going to the older, perhaps move into the older age category moving forward. I hope it will make sense up to that point.
One question. So do you look at the number or provider of that mission? There's an underlying question of whether that's a quality drop or whatever. Or something.
So here we focus on price. And the shift in price could be driven by a position change. So in the linear model, the model is unlikely to address that issue. But later on, we use the double machine learning different framework, which is able to tackle the potential position change before and after motivation. So we sort of use that model to rule out the possibility that the price shift is driven by providers also would more likely to enter driven by selections of
I didn't actually have that, so that was.
Yeah. This is the one we're trying to look at, but I still do not have the reasons.
If we're using a model for that, can you not just look at the percent that are in that bucket before and after? So did the share of 18 to 20 decrease after the policy change?
The share of
Like the number of the number in that bucket, did that go down after the message? Because if it did, then it's just fewer quantities so people wanted more, so the value of that benefit.
again, we haven't looked at the content yet. We should, but we haven't. Well, the thing is
So I
that,
was saying even before you do any fancy thing, if you just looked at the shared numbers.
right. And the thing is that, this is only one website. And even if the quantity shift 100, would not complete that this reflect the entire market. That's why we focus on price, which is the market price, and hopefully will reflect what is going on in overall.
Just clarification question, so do the doors, the policy change? Or they won't be?
This is a question that I cannot answer, but I guess, yes, it's for the big risk. So we probably do, and this is something. I would suspect highly likely yes.
If there's something,
So-
it's likely that they.
But they allocate the liability on the platform side instead of the news. Engage on the platform.
Is the reviewer identity known? Like, is there a profile associated with the person that reviews reviews, or are they all kind of anonymous? Is there any other way that we could think about maybe like selection into who gives reviews, or whether or not like again connect to Lena's comment a little bit, whether or not maybe because this legislation is there, that people are more hesitant to potentially admit to engaging in illegal activity, therefore, we see some selection that are driving our observations.
I guess the concern behind it that if ever we identify any example trigger by selection of reviews, it's the selection of bias. A simple approach to tackle that, to address that issue is to control the individual provider fixes that, or individual reviewer fixes that, or to focus on the same set of reviewers and providers to see if we still observe change. And I'm going to show in one of the slides, in one slide coming up after 2 minutes that even if we control individual providers, our results still remain robust. To address the potential issue that this might be true research.
Yeah, I don't know.
Can I have a question? To understand the platform. So if the platform becomes more reliable, can they just start after the platform, after the policy, I'm just gonna remove all the young. If I think the young population problem, they just can you see whether the supply changes assumption?
So what they are doing to
Yeah.
So after the all includes the ongoing issues are limited, why the increasing price increase for environment and increasing supply of opportunities. We do not know what the platforms that specific to drive that change. It perhaps is their developing some elements to take down the impact. Or partner with the agents.
Can you not measure the supply chain?
If one platform does, but not.
Not yes.
Yeah, so moving forward to more precisely capture the price change among participants for likely markets. We go beyond the simple identification approach to implement the second approach to infer the provider's true age. And what we did do here is that we utilize an algorithm called expectation maximization algorithm to infer the underlying true age of the providers. The EM algorithm is a standard method in statistics and machine learning that have been used to estimate the most likely hidden states underlying the observed data. So I'm going to explain the mechanism behind it. So here's the intuition behind the second approach. We do not observe the ground truth, the true age group. And we want to use the reported age in reviews to infer the ground truth. So this step of inference requires some assumption. In the first approach, we assume that the reported age group closely reflect the true age. And the underage providers will be classified in the youngest available age category 18. Moving to this expectation maximization algorithm, sort of relax that assumption and allow for a more realistic reporting pattern. We expect the true age group to include additional category for those under 18, right? So there are 4 reported age groups, but for true age group, there are 5 because they might be underage. And so, for example, if a provider is truly underage, there might be 90% of a chance for them to be classified in the youngest available age category, 18-24, and only 10% of a chance the reviewers will be putting them in 25 to 36. Also, specifically, we model this reporting pattern as a conditional probability. And we store this conditional probability in the 4x5 matrix because there are 4 reported age group and 5 true age groups. So conditional only true age. What would be the likelihood for a provider to be reported in certain age categories? And also we treat the providers in our data set from provider 1 to n, their true year of birth or true age as a latent variable from theta 1 to theta n. So our goal here is to jointly estimate this reporting process, the conditional probabilities, along with the set of true year of birth, the true age of the providers that will maximize the likelihood of our observed data. This likelihood function or the objective function we try to maximize is actually a product of this conditional probabilities of report, right, across all reviews. And the posting time of each review, what is the true age, and what would be the likelihood of observing the reported age group category in our review data. We estimate this in an iterative process, starting with the initial guess, and then alternate updating the reporting conditional probabilities along with the set of true year of birth of providers, and until the estimate converge. This procedure gives us a set of estimate age of the providers that will maximize our observed data. Using this new estimate, when we apply the different framework, we observe that the coefficient even becomes stronger. So now the underage participants experience a 16% higher increase in price following the platform liability intervention relative to the older ones. When we believe we do a better job in inferring who is the age, the coefficient gets larger.
Maybe I missed this, but do the standard errors in the data account for the age is estimated?
So, which is what I don't know.
So we use
The regressor is estimated. Yeah, right.
The set of data used for estimation is not used for estimating the effect on price. So you want to make sure that data point is independent. The same data point is not used twice for estimation and also the estimation function results.
But still, you have standard errors. Yeah. You have standard errors on the y. The y is not. It's not deterministic again.
Yeah, but why is price? So the standard error might include some measurement.
Not on the standard error. So standard error, the y is price. You have standard errors on the age.
On the age, yeah.
So on the s, right? So it's not deterministic.
Yeah, we all have variables price here.
Yeah.
But that's a problem, I think.
Yeah, I'm just saying, yeah. We can talk.
There is price within this category determined by this process.
Right,
So the
but
outcome variable is the timing of the legislation. I'm sorry, the intervention variable. is the timing.
interacting with the age, but the age now is a standard. It's not deterministic.
It's like measurement error, right?
There's a measurement.
So you have
Yeah,
attenuation bias.
We should go into the standard errors.
If you run, I don't know if you can for this, if double machine learning is robust against that because of the first stage nuisance, that whole argument, right? But
Maybe I'm misunderstanding. How is the fraction of individuals that are in this lowest age bucket? How's the fraction of them that actually are underage? What variation in the data identifies that?
What variation in data?
Yeah.
So if we use the reported age to infer the true age.
Yeah, so let's say that like 30% of individuals in our sample are reported to the 24 group.
Yeah.
How do we know what fraction of those individuals are actually underage? Like what in the data actually like pins down
We use the reported age to infer the true age of the parties. Not to cover the true age.
I think they just assume that in this category there is some fraction unknown.
there exists a hidden stage, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think.
So then, I guess, but what pins down that?
The same provider, different reviewers can be different, hints for the same provider.
Active periods.
Active periods of time.
Different periods of time. Okay, so misidentification rate, so kind of if you're an individual that's never been labeled as 25 to 30 something, then you're more likely to be underage and less likely to be overage.
But we are estimating the reported condition probability out of those.
I might. Be
I hope we can discuss this.
Yeah.
Allow me to move forward. So this is how the pre-trend looks like. The figure here plots the estimate coefficient for the differential trends between the treated group and the control group. We see that the treated and control unit follow the parallel trend prior to intervention. In the pre-period, the average is basically zero. In the post-period, we see more positive coefficient, especially in the months after this went into effect. So this is sort of, shows the satisfaction of the parallel pre-trend assumption. Well, if you are concerned that our results of increase are largely driven by lag months, it's part of the data. But even when we take it out, the results are shown in the second column of the table. It gets slightly smaller as expected, but still a highly significant 15% increase. Well, just to get back to one of the questions from the audience. So another biggest concern is that if you are concerned about that our results of increase is driven by selection story, higher priced individuals from the youngest age group are more likely to stay in the market or more likely to be reported after the liability intervention. We further control the individual provider fixed effect, and results are reported in the third column with very robust. Okay, so we want to be really cautious about this.
Yeah, sorry, quick question. If I remember correctly, the first analysis where you just look at like 18 to 24 showed like a 15% increase in price. Here, if I understand correctly, it's saying that people who are actually underage are seeing a 15% increase in price. Wouldn't we expect this to be larger, given that youngest age group is both mix of underage and legal?
16%. So I'm comparing that in the first approach is that when you are using the providers who are being listed for all of these as the youngest candidate or to be this set of providers for 2 minors, the increase is 15%. And now when we use the improved algorithm to identify the set of providers who are more likely to under 18, the coefficient increase by 1%, 16%. So what we believe we do a better job in identifying minors, the coefficient is larger.
What share of that youngest group are minors?
If I recall correctly, you're saying that the percentage of the treatment group versus prevention, around 14%.
I think you're asking, given that the second approach identifies who we think are minors?
Yeah.
if we go back to the first approach, what percent of the 18 to 24-year-olds do we later say, oh, we think they're actually minors?
I don't have the, yeah, top of mind. They're asking them over that. How much do you trust the second approach? Really?
It's not about how much you trust the second approach, it's more just like trying to understand why these treatment effect estimates are so similar.
Yeah,
I would expect
yeah.
them to be quite different.
Additional projects might move up that drop off. We can check that. And then, so we want to be extremely cautious about these results. Also, repeating the data or like some of the assumption. The traditional linear dependent regression are implicitly or explicitly based on some statistical assumptions, including, first of all, the features of the providers affect the price in a linear fashion. But in the real world setting, that might not be the case. The second is that effects of the treatment are homogeneous across the individual. So linear model assume that to be true, which does not allow heterogeneity. But in the paper, we show that there might exist a large set of heterogeneous treatment. And lastly, the model assumes that the composition of the individuals of the treatment and control group remain unchanged over time. So what does that mean specifically in our setting is that it requires the distribution, at least for the features of the providers, does not shift over time. But if you are concerned about, again, the selection story, the results might be driven by providers with certain features more likely to enter or stay in the market or more likely to be reported after the platform liability intervention. This linear model are limited. We cannot verify if the behind the statistical assumptions are valid or not. In this regard, we relax each of these assumptions using a more advanced tool to address each of these concerns, a more advanced tool that treat control variables non-parametrically, a model that allow heterogeneity in treatment effects and also allow for the composition changes. Specifically, we additionally estimate the average treatment effect using the double machine learning dependent estimate. For the interest of time, I don't know how much time we have. We might not get into. We might not get into. I don't get into technical details here. But here, just construct a data in two by two framework, two group treatment control group, two period pre-post period. So I might not have time to get into this, but basically the idea here is that if you take part of the data to build the prediction model for the outcome variable y and propensity score of the treatment status, either it's pre-post period or treatment control group, and then you take the other part of the data for inference to estimate the treatment effect. The results are shown in this table when we are using the column indicated when we're using different machine learning models to predict the outcome variable in the score. So this model, the double robust estimator, identified a 10 to 70% increase in hourly transaction price charged by providers identified to be in the youngest age group compared with those in the older age groups after the pause reform. And up to this point, I hope that I have convinced you that there is a higher increase in price for the providers identified in the youngest age category. And the following, I'm going to explain how we can interpret this increase in price in the youngest age group as a likely decrease in supply of the underage participants in the market. So there are three scenarios that can possibly explain our results. The first one is that, so notably, the identified increase in price is associated with the youngest age group in our data. This can either mean there are a bunch of underage in the youngest age category, or people in this age group could be 18 to 24 youngest adult providers or a mixture of both. If the first scenario is that if the identified increase in price is driven by price differentials of the underage participants in the youngest age group, we illustrate what is going on with this very basic scientific. A higher increase in price is likely driven by shift in supply curve, relative increase in demand or relative decrease in supply, whichever side is dominant. We go ahead with the assumption that platform liability is unlikely to increase demand for services provided by underage participants. It will be extremely difficult to argue there is an increase in demand for underage providers. If you can agree with me on that, then the relative increase in price is likely driven by corresponding decrease in supply of the labor inputs from the underage participants. So when the supply curve shifts left, people drop out from the market, equilibrium price goes up. Another scenario is that people do not drop out from the market, but the cost of engaging in the market increase. For example, now the underage providers might face a higher cost in generating fake advertisement. When the supply curve shifts up, cost increase, this will result in an increase in price as well. We can imagine this scenario as now we're imposing heavy tax on the transaction involving buyers. But graphically, supply curve shift up or left might look the same. A small nuance or the possibility we're concerned about that might not lead to the decrease in the number of transactions in underage group is that demand is highly inelastic, right? In this sense, when the buyers are always willing to pay the increment price, we might not end up with fewer underage participants. Okay. Well, the clicker doesn't.
Was I keep this in?
There has been a bunch of literature suggesting that commercial sex is a highly elastic product. The demand decrease due to price increase could be large. So this scenario with demand being super inelastic might not be the scenario I'm trying to convince you here. When cost increase, supply curve shifts up, we should expect fewer transactions in the group of interest. So up to this point, we can imagine that now there might be fewer or it is more difficult to sell the underage for sex on the commercial sex market, in the online commercial sex market. In this regard, the consumers are likely to substitute towards services provided by closest alternatives, the youngest adult providers. So let's to the last scenario I want to discuss here. If the price increase is driven by the youngest adult providers, 18 to 24, in the youngest age category, we go ahead with the assumption that this, among all the adult participants, this policy does not intervene the supply side differentially based on the provider's age. There's all the updated changes we see on the websites or specifically targeting child exploitation materials. In this regard, we argue the substitution effect. When it's more difficult to purchase services provided by 16-year-old, consumers might substitute towards services provided by 19, 20-year-old, which raise up the demand for the services provided by youngest adult providers, therefore corresponding increase in price. But all the explanation consistently point out to the same story. We can interpret now the increase in price for youngest service providers as a likely decrease in supply of underage participants in the online marketplace for commercial sex. I would like to conclude with a few primary contributions of this work. The first is that what we have shown is imposing platform liability actually changed the equilibrium behavior in this particular context, decreasing the supply of underage victims. So without external pressure, the platforms will choose to maximize the objective function, which is the shareholder value. And this likely result in generating negative externalities. When the government step in to impose liability, this can help the firms to realign their incentives with the public social welfare and internalize some of this negative externalities. And people are saying that platform liability is going to have a lot of harm, no benefit. Quite frankly, this paper is the first empirical study that provide evidence in supporting the potential benefit of this federal legislation, processes that which impose platform liability. On the websites passed in 2018, that it might have made it more difficult to sell the underage for sex on the internet. And the way we get to there is through price. We use price to infer the supply, the change in supply in this particular context, building on the classical framework developed by Cass and Murphy. We also incorporate the substitution effect, which provide an extension on the existing theoretical structure or market supply and demand change and price, which can be applied in similar market analysis for interest rates. This is everything, right?
The paper is not working.
I don't think so.
Let me give it another try. Let's see the individual fixed effect.
It's open back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Well, it's robust. Hi, everybody. My name is Yi. I really appreciate the chance to discuss this very interesting paper. I come from University of Wisconsin. So there are several things that I really like about this paper. Before doing that, before talking about what things I like about this paper, I would like to, just to try to recap the background of this paper. So there's one law piece called Section 230. And this Section 230 actually frees all these kind of online social media platforms from being responsible for whatever the content is, on this kind of platforms. So basically, whatever harmful or controversial content you see on these social media platforms, actually these platforms are not really responsible for that. They are free from this kind of responsibility. So this is what Section 230 says. But there was a thing that is an exception for this whole thing, actually introduced in 2018, which is the focus of this paper, which is called FOSTA-SESTA, that specifically just says one thing platforms need to be responsible for, which is sex trafficking. When I really searched FOSTA-SESTA on Google, this result was surprising to me. I thought it was something like it sounds like a good intervention to protect this kind of sex providers, especially underage sex providers, from being harmed. But if you search FOSTA-SESTA, even without any other terms on Google, you can see this is the result. Everything is negative about this specific policy. So you see the stop, and stop FOSTA-SESTA, and the sex work is work, okay, and somebody will call for 230 back. So there are a lot of negative reactions to this kind of policy. And one of these reasons is like they're saying that a lot of such trafficking is still there, but just more underground, more like not measured online. And so that's why I think this paper is interesting, because it's trying to respond to such questions about the specific policy. And actually it responds to the effectiveness doubts on FOSTA-SESTA. Especially they will focus on the supply of underage sex service providers. The reason why is why we consider that is because the definition of sex trafficking depends on whether you're underage and whether you're adult. So if you're underage, no matter whether there's consent, no matter whether there's a coercion, everything, as long as there's some sex transaction related thing happen, is considered as sex trafficking. But if it's adult, if there's consent, if there's no coercion, that is fine. That's legal. So that's why if you look at the sex transaction related to underage, it is a really good reflection about whether this specific policy is effective. So that's the focus of this paper, just to look at how this specific policy will affect the supply of such underage sex service providers. Here are just several things that I think this paper just does really well. The first thing is it's a really great, unique data set. It's like ASCII review platforms, something similar to Read My Professor, maybe. But my ASCII. And the important thing about this platform is it has some information about customer reported age and price data. So first of all, these two are the most important attributes in this data set. And what's more important is like it's customer reported. So I think that and also it's over time. So that partially explains, I think, Justin's question about the variation. So this variation comes from all this customer reported, not the true age. And that's one thing. Another thing that I really like about this paper is about the way that they construct the treatment versus control groups. So it's really hard to study such scenarios because a lot of things are unobservable. You cannot really collect credit card data for such transactions. So you only rely on whatever it is on this kind of review platforms. So the proxy or like the simple method is just treating the youngest age group as the group that will be affected the most because usually if you're underage, it will just tell you, okay, I'm 18 or whatever. So just use this as the youngest age group as the treatment group is just a great proxy at least. And then what's more interesting is like they developed an algorithm that estimates the real age, which utilizes the variation in time and readers, since again, it is reported data. And this is something that they try to construct through this kind of a maximum likelihood method that we have the real age and the reported age. And because of that variation, you can try to estimate this whole table so that you can get a sense of whether a specific person is really underage or not. And of course, it's really, it would be helpful if you can show me this data, show us this data, so how many people here are really underage based on your estimation. That data should be helpful. And the other thing I think is also very smart is to use price as proxy for supply. And I think Helen already did a good job in demonstrating why this is important. So basically, the idea is try to show there's a shift in supply. Okay, but since, as I said, this kind of transactions are not really observable, so they just use price as a proxy. So if you observe the price increases, and you can claim that the demand is unshifted, then the shift must come from the supply side, which is exactly what they show in their data. Just several thoughts about this paper, which I think there is some more room to explore. The first thing is I think there's already some discussion around that, whether this kind of is really reduced supply with increased cost. Why is that important? Because from a policymaker's point of view, what's more important is like the equilibrium level of supply, rather than whether the supply curve really shifted, right? So even if the supply curve shifted, if the demand curve is pretty, inelastic, the equilibrium level of supply also does not really change much. So the authors really provide some discussions about demand elasticity, which is really good. And another thing about that is that maybe you can use some data from this erotic monkey. And it may help, although it's only one platform, it's not complete. At least you can see a little bit, get a sense of the demand and supply change before and after the pulse. I think some question in the audience already mentioned that. Another thought I have is about the price. By the way, I'm a theorist, so I was thinking in a way like more from a theoretical point of view. So high price sometimes can serve as a signal for high cost. Okay, in this case, high maybe it's underage. I learned that, by the way, from Ron 8 years ago from his class. So for marginal.
What they context and then they listen.
Yeah.
So long-term impact. So you see, this is possible. So basically, this kind of shift in price maybe can due to some like signaling effect. So when you see a high price, it's a signal for underage. I don't have a good way to how to really preclude that from the empirical point of view. But at least I learned something from Ron. The third thing. The third thing that I want to mention is that any welfare implications for adult providers. The reason why I mentioned that is if you look at all these kind of critiques about both the SASTA, many of this actually are related to over censorship, so that it will impact the provider rights. What is over censorship? That means like, oh, you cannot really post anything underage. the platform just try to be safe so that they just censor everything. So as long as you talk about this kind of sex transactions, they will just take it out. And that's the thing that actually is more concerning to the eyes of some sex service providers, because they think that if you push them off the internet, you force them into the street, then the problem is like they cannot really use social media as a way to screen their customers. So that they claim that it's maybe more dangerous for them to in this situation compared to that before. So my thought is like, is there anything that we can do to infer the implication of such policy on adult providers? And if they are also impacted, there's another related question is like, are they a really good control group, before and after this policy change? So in order to respond to that question, I think one way to answer this is can at least, use some of the data in this kind of review platform, because I think it's a review platform, so there will be some review data. For example, text. So what kind of things they say about these providers, and also what kind of things this provider maybe did introduce themselves. So at least maybe it's possible to see, is there any providers who did not really rely on social media that much even before the policy change? And then these people may be served as a better control group before and after the policy. So basically, my thought is like, can we just try to utilize some more review information, some of maybe just a text in the data set? Okay. So again, I really like this paper, and I think this paper can do even more than just utilizing this age and the price data, and can give a better, maybe even better demonstration of what's going on here. Okay. I give 2 minutes back to you.
Things to say about paper is really, which is really encouraging. I just want to get back to two things you say in terms of the price as a signal, which is a really smart strategy. And yes, we did see in our data that younger service providers are usually associated with higher price. But what I'm concerned about, I need to think more on how to implement this, because that price is already our outcome variable. And using that as a signal, or underage might involve some level of indulgency. So I need to think about it, what might be the road for us to get around that. And the other thing is that we haven't looked at the text data yet. But one potential way to utilize the information in text data is that there might be some keywords you can use from the review, for example, young, fresh, and just see if the review data contain this kind of information. Does it align with the age signal that we're looking at to have another layer of information to confirm whether some providers should belong to the treatment? Just two things.
Thank you.